Okay, we're going to get started here. Running a few minutes late. If you could table all of your movie theater chit chat. Keep your phones on if you like, of course. Welcome. This is the Future of Brand Partnerships. We've heard this title before, but we hope to make it more interesting this time specifically. My name is Adrian Sexton. I'm the CEO of a Korean-based company that does a platform around an all-in-one set-top, a new digital signage ecosystem, and a new player that promises e-commerce or commerce video on demand. I can share more later. But I also want to turn it over to the panel, and instead of me trying to read their stats, why don't you start with Story Worldwide with Simon, and tell us about yourself and your biggest achievement in the past year or next year.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that one. So Simon Kelly from Story Worldwide. I'm the co-founder and CEO. We basically do a couple of things. We help brands find their story, and that's something that every brand needs to do. We live in an age of transparency, and you can't hide in this digital age as a brand, so you better find out what your story is, and it has to be authentic. It's got to be ownable, otherwise you just won't survive. So that's the finding part. And Mike, the co-founder, was a Pulitzer Prize finalist as an investigative journalist. So we kind of apply that discipline to helping brands find their stories. Really, kind of based on the principle that data is the plural of story. So we really unpack data and find out what those narratives are. And then we make stories. And there's a lot of talk about storytelling, and we believe that actually we're out of the storytelling age, we're in the story-making age. Storytelling implies that a one-way monologue, that there's a teller and a listener, whereas making implies collaboration, and that you're co-creating stories together. And that's really, and I'm sure we'll get into that today. There are these immersive technologies that are around, from VR to AR to 360 video, projection mapping, etc., AI, and so on, that enable you to really, really engage with your audience and co-create stories together. And that we really believe is the future of advertising, and we call it the post-advertising age. I could go on.
And what's your biggest individual claim to fame now?
No, you asked me about either that or what I was going to do in the future. Okay. So in the next 12 months, I'm going to write a book about the history of mankind, but it won't be what you're expecting.
Not ambitious.
That's a tough one.
I should just leave.
Lee, go ahead.
I am Lee Zellweger. I'm the publisher of Reader's Digest Brands. So we are a trusted media brands company, along with Taste of Home and The Family Handyman. As might be apparent, we are a heritage print brand that is doing our best to transform ourselves into a digital brand as well. It's been very successful. For the most part, we now deliver more a monthly audience in digital than we do in print, and the print number is about 40 million, so it's a big number. So I think if I had to say what I need to do next year, it's continue our digital revenue growth, or otherwise I won't be here next year.
Different capacity. All right, Marcy.
Hello, my name is Marcy Dabra. I'm the Senior Vice President of Advertising. The underground title is Senior Vice President of Media Operations. So Hyphen, what do? We are an ad agency. We are half creative and half what we would call media executional, which is unique. We're probably the only one out there like this. So we are one of 11 companies in the world that are official marketing partners of all the major social media channels: Facebook, Pinterest, Snapchat, etc. So let's see, any biggest achievement in the year?
Or next year.
Or next year. I joined Hyphen 3 months ago. That was probably my biggest good job. But I would say for the year, we are looking, and we're very close to having $1 billion in media spend run through our proprietary platform. So that's definitely our big goal right now.
Great, big number. All right, but last up we have Jamie from Fathom.
Thank you. So Jamie Wadlam, Vice President of Marketing for Fathom Events, and we are the leaders in event cinema, most known for the Metropolitan Opera, some of our sporting events, live concerts, movie premieres. I think from a company standpoint, our biggest achievement over the last year has been becoming the 12th largest distributor of content to movie theaters in the country, and that's up against every major movie studio out there. So definitely we're running along with the big dogs. In terms of a personal standpoint, I launched a sponsorship, a successful sponsorship revenue stream last year with Fathom, which we're looking to grow this year into another, real source of revenue for our business.
You're talking Atom Films or ticketing? Is that the,
I'm sorry?
what was the Atom you said? I missed
Sponsorship revenue?
Yeah,
Or-
who's the partner on that?
Sponsorship revenue, we're doing it all internal, so it's just a new division within our company to try and generate sponsorships around our in-cinema events.
No, I've
We
heard
do
of-
have a partnership with Atom Tickets, though.
That's what I
Yeah.
thought. Okay, yeah, those guys have come out of the blue, and I'm curious to see how they make it. So I've given some very set sort of questions to the panel via an email yesterday, and I have a couple surprise ones, of course, too. But I also want to say to this audience, if you raise your hand or shout at me and say, I have a question, or I don't agree, or whatever it is, I will call you out. I will say, please share, because I do want this to be interactive. I want people to get out as much as they spend, sitting there playing with their cell phones. So I'm going to start with an easy question that takes off where Simon kind of said VR, AR, AI. These are all emergent. When you connect some of them to entertainment, you don't know what to connect. You have Magic Leap, a company that's raised $1 billion, is aiming to get an $8 billion valuation shortly, I hear. A friend of mine's the chief content officer, and no product to market. So I find it very interesting that we're all sort of drawn to this next future tense of storytelling. But what can we do with it? I'll open it up, because again, I want to hear from the the exhibitor side. I want to hear from the advertiser side, from the Reader's Digest side, which I think is fascinating. 40 million subs is not a small deal, and then obviously into the bigger story worldwide sort of thinking of it. How do you prioritize VR, AR, and AI? And then what do you think? What's the reality today, and what's the reality next?
Well, first of all, I think it's a bit like social media in that there's no such thing as social media anymore. It's just media. If it's not social, then you're not doing it right. And I think VR and AR will go the same way. That right now, they are separate disciplines. There'll be one discipline, and eventually it'll just be reality. So that's a little bit of the sort of the future state. But nobody's really figured it out. There are lots of really good, VR, AR examples, but they're kind of siloed. And I think that the way to approach it is the way we approach everything from the beginning of the internet to mobile to email to digital, to social. And what you do is you figure out how people are going to use this new channel. And you become relevant. You figure out not how can I interrupt this content experience, which is what we're still in this sort of advertising 1.0 paradigm where, oh great, there's a new way that I can interrupt somebody's great content experience. That's fantastic. Here's something that you really don't want, and it's going to turn you off. So I think let's not do that. I think we have a great chance within the industry to really figure out how audiences are going to use this content, and secondly, as brands, how can you augment that experience? I think that's the not interrupt it, but how can you become a virtual reality experience for audiences and create community around it. Secondly, figure out what happens next. How can you create great media out of these virtual reality experiences that your audiences can share, can challenge each other, can game, we're nowhere close yet to no brand that I know is close to figuring it out. So that's where I think we are.
Okay. Anyone else?
We just really dip our toe in AR, nothing really in VR, but I did read a quote yesterday from Bill Gates who said we overestimate what's happening over the next 2 years with new products, and we underestimate what's happening with those same products 10 years from now. And I kind of feel like that's where we are a little bit on that. And then there was a term called the peak of inflated expectations, which is kind of takes place at that early part of new technology. So as I say, I'm certainly not an expert on that, and we do a little bit of AR online for the family handyman do-it-yourself. We do 360 videos and things like that, but nothing in the VR realm. So I will pass it on to you.
For advertising, especially social media, you'll hear the term a thumb stopper. AR is a really big thumb stopper. You want to get your audience to stop and look and participate. Whatever your objective may be, awareness, engagement, etc., AR has proven to be a very big thumb stopper. It's not for every brand, but you look at Snapchat. Snapchat made it, go to the masses. Now everyone's using AR. I would say for us, VR, remains to be seen what that's going to look like in the social media world. AI, however, what we do behind the scenes at our company, our competitors, our partners, in Facebook, etc., AI and machine learning is incredibly important, and that's how they're learning and taking all the CRM data and all the metrics that are produced and learning and creating products and creating more thumb stoppers. So, to your point, exactly, in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we have no idea what it's going to look like, and it's going to look a lot different.
Yeah, I mean, we have not experimented with VR or AR yet because we need it to be accessible to the masses in the cinema environment, which I know there was a panel on this immediately before this, that we're just not there yet. There's lobby experiences and there's some unique tests that are going on, but for us personally, we can't explore too much because we're doing everything at scale. But I do think just in general in the world, it's more right now. It's all more of a publicity play in a lot of cases than it is for the actual experience for somebody to have. And I think there was a good example of this last week with Nike, and Nike launched the track. I think it was in Manila, where you can race yourself when you're running around this track. And that's something that not that many people are going to be able to experience, but the publicity and what comes out of something like that is where I feel like we are right now, is just, the possibility, like you said, of what can happen in a few years and what may be more accessible to yourself, down the road.
Right. Well, I'm surprised they had a VR panel at Digital Hollywood, actually. But no, I think from my point of view, just to add a different perspective, that AI, and I think, Marcy, you might agree, that AI is really going to start to creep into entertainment and advertising in a big way, because we're kind of done with the algorithm, done with a lot of these, blockable ads and stuff like that. You need to build, I think your term CRM into it as a CRM instrument is really dead on. What we're experimenting with, and again, this is Korea Innovation at work, I guess, but is emotional AI, so that you could have a relationship. Alexa's already built some of that. You kind of refer to Alexa as your second child or your partner or whatever you might say. People call it out. Someone tried to, was it Burger King or someone tried to fake it into an audio ad and call it out and get people to say, wow, it's actually communicating like IoT should. But I think that we're really seeing to Lee's point too, we're seeing a lot of sort of experiments, PR related perhaps. We're seeing in my neck of the woods, I used to go to the arcades at the movie theaters as a child or teenager, and you're now seeing the video arcade come back as a VR arcade thanks to IMAX and some of its change. So we're seeing this kind of thumb stopper opportunity, but I think for the AI, the VR, and the AR, I think you're getting to a point where people are saying, you know what, I need to get a little bit more immersive because I am so potentially bored with the social or just the plain media that I'm getting served up every day. So I need something to break the sort of static. And I think there's really a lot to be done, specifically with brands who say, I need to do something interesting. And maybe it's 360 because there's not enough headsets. There's only thousands of headsets, not millions of headsets. And I really need to find my way into that sort of embodiment of I've got great content, I've got great creativity, and like Snapchat did early on, and they're still, under a lot of fire these days with their quarterlies, but how do I step above the noise, the static, with content? And so that's where I think it is approaching. Do you guys have sense at all if there is an ROI anytime soon for this stuff, though, or is it all just kind of nascent, early trends, so little content, so little headsets?
No, it's
Okay.
the simple. I'm involved with a VR AR startup, a bunch of ex-Microsoft HoloLens people. They're now through their second rounds. They're 12 months old. It's valued at $41 million. I don't understand how that's possible, but because they haven't generated a single cent in revenue yet, and they haven't figured out their revenue model. But what they have on it's a social gaming platform that's cross-platform, cross HoloLens, cross Vive, and so on. Is they've got a fantastic community. And I think that's really the thing that all of us, as marketers and brands, need to really understand that's without a community, you're lost. There's just no way that you can continue to beat people over the head with messages they don't want. You've got to involve them in the process and give them something that's either useful or entertaining, and that's what Rec Room is doing. And so right now, if I want to play frisbee golf with some guy in Russia, I can do it. I don't know why I'd want to do that, but I could. But there are all these unexpected ways, your Bill Gates quote, that they're finding that people are using it. They're teaching, people across the world are collaborating on art projects, using Rec Room as a way to do it. So I think that there's just and again, I think we've really just got to figure out and really collaborate with audiences to help them get the most out of it. And there's a massive opportunity for brands to be part of that experience and really help ignite those experiences and curate those experiences.
Right.
I mean, I think I saw the CMO of Six Flags speaking recently and talking about how they were adding VR experiences to a lot of their roller coaster rides in various cities. And that was because, and they would say, I think, that there is ROI there because that's giving them something new to engage consumers and have them either come back or try for the first time one of their parks. So I think they're proving ROI, but it's, again, more on a limited scale basis.
Yeah, I think, sorry, go ahead, you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
I think the travel industry is probably closest to figuring that out a little bit, just because I read recently that the Virgin Travel, they have these brick and mortar travel agencies, and they created these VR experiences for Necker Island and other sort of Virgin properties around the globe, and they saw a massive spike in sales as a result of it. So from using those kinds of VR and AR experiences to increase sales, yeah, there's ROI there. I think for the people that are not using it to directly influence commerce, that they're still really trying to figure out what the ROI is.
I think also a metaphor, you mentioned brands getting in there, just trying to try stuff, maybe PR, stunt a little bit. I've worked with a lot of the creators, the MCN creators, and they always, the smarter ones, let's say, flock to the new platforms, the new technologies, because they know they have an opportunity to be first, to claim some space, to build that early adopter audience, which for VR is, I have little kids, 7 and 10, and you show them their first VR thing and they are just crazy about that. They're almost over YouTube and over Snapchat. They're very fickle and the earliest of adopters these days. But I think that we're really seeing the brands that are trying to get out early and kind of set the business or ad models around these things are really being aggressive. I think the influencers are. I know for a fact they're all into VR as much as they can figure it out. And then the last part is, as many have said here, it's that engagement. Can I get deeper engagement? Can I get some new numbers that aren't going to be compared to past numbers that may be corrupted or maybe just a little bit off or not as relevant anymore? So I think that is starting to play into a lot of people's minds. How can I win that, Cannes Lion, but also how can I really get into an audience early and build connection where it's a little bit easier because there's not that much noise on it. Speaking of sort of entertainment and VR arcades and all that, there was something I shared with the panel here. National CineMedia has those first look things where they play Sony TV ads and all that kind of fun stuff, and you either show up early because you didn't know better, or you have a reserved seat, so you show up 15 minutes into a movie. They are saying they want to go content-driven, entertainment-focused, not be all about the brand and the lift and the sort of forced exposure to whatever they're trying to sell, product, service, experience, whatever. How do you guys look at that and say content is X and advertising is Y? Does that shift the sort of spectrum a little bit to say, you know what, consumers are getting smarter, they just want lifestyle programming where the brand is not so obvious? How do you guys play against that if you know, with publications, with creative, with advertising, with exhibition as well? I mean, Fathom's got a brand, bigger brand B2C than National CineMedia, obviously, and your top 12 you mentioned. But I just wonder, how are you sort of cutting through that with the Met programming, with opera, et cetera? How are you really coming in saying, hey, we're content, we're not trying to sell you our brand or our delta in the price or whatever it is? How do you go about it?
Yeah, I mean, we've always said content is king for everything that we do, and people aren't coming. You don't go to see Harry Potter because it's Warner Brothers. You go because it's Harry Potter. So we've always sort of teetered on the building the brand around the fact that we offer these unique, exclusive experiences, but also letting our content sort of lead the way. I mean, if you're a Metropolitan Opera fan, that's what you're going to see. So, you know, we've been very cautious to sort of walk a fine line in how much you try and put the brand in somebody's face, other than what we can offer them from an attribute standpoint and what's different and unique about what we can offer to them, and create loyalty that way and have them recognize that. I would say for what NCM is doing specifically too, I think they're trying to be very revolutionary in the way they approach their show, because to exactly what you said, there's way more reserved seats in exhibition now, and people are buying tickets in advance in much higher numbers. So in order to stay relevant and to continue their $600-700 million business, they have to come up with a new way to encourage people to get there early. And it's got to be that somebody has to create loyalty with what they are showing and have a sense of need to go early to see whatever it is, because the content's so good. They're not going to go early just to see ads. It's just not going to happen anymore in this day and age, where it might have in the past when you didn't have the reserved seating or the online ticket purchase options.
For advertising, content is king as well. I mean, that's just a theme that travels throughout, I think, all of our industries. The difference being, though, is for our clients who are brands, what type of content, really resides with their audience. Because that's the big thing in social media. What audience are you getting? Because you can get very targeted. And you want to get very targeted because that's, return on investment is, the messaging and getting the lowest amount of dollars spent and getting a lot of return. So for some brands, it's, it looks really bad, honestly. UGC content, it's user generated, it's really horrible looking, and I'm from an advertising agency that creates really, really slick, sexy stuff. But it makes sense for that brand. So whatever it means, whenever you're looking, to whoever your audience is, understand your audience, understand what message and what story you're trying to tell, because really advertising is about a story you're trying to tell. Whether it's a funny story, a sad story, just get to know me story, or buy something from me story. But content is still, and I think that's what people forget. They think, well, if I just reach the largest audience in the world, I'll get a lot of people to buy my product, and that's just not true. You have to know your audience.
Content is king. But I think for us, the challenge is to maintain the authenticity of the brand and the association with Reader's Digest and other brands of trusted media brands. We are storytellers, and we've been doing it for 95 years. We're pretty good at it. But it is about doing it in a way that is most valuable for our clients, obviously, on the advertising side. It does have some great advantages, of course. It helps you get out of display advertising, especially on mobile, so it has some real advantages, and there are certainly some problems there. I think we need to think about it a little bit differently in terms of measurement and expectations, and we need to reflect that they are different units, and maybe there's some different kind of connections being made. Maybe it takes longer for actual things to happen, so we need to be more cognizant of things like that. But I think authenticity ultimately is the key in content.
Yeah, well, I would say that it's more than content. It's about story. I'm somewhat biased, obviously, but I think I disagree with the notion that content and advertising are separate. I think they're one and the same thing. If you're not, as a brand, if you're not creating great content that's entertaining and useful, and finding ways to disseminate and to your point, to make sure that you understand the audience and make sure that content not only reflects the true brand story, but also meets a need that that the audience has. If you're not doing that, then you're screwed. There's no point. So, and we're still doing this advertising 1.0 interruption model. I can't stand it. I don't know if any of you have watched Vikings on the History Channel. It's phenomenal. I urge all of you to watch it. It's got everything you need, from linguistic history of Germanic languages on the one hand, to a lot of sex and violence on the other hand. So it's perfect. But then in the middle of all of this, there's here's an ad. It's going to be over. The pain is going to be over in 60 seconds, 55 seconds, and fuck off. I don't want that. I want this interruption, this experience, this content experience, to be uninterrupted. And so I've been thinking about, well, what would I do? How would somehow the series has got to be made and somebody's got to pay for it. So maybe there are brands out there that could be creating that kind of content, and so if so, who would have a kind of relative authority to do that? And so it's Carlsberg, it's Volvo, it's brands. I guarantee that they would generate so much more engagement and traction if brands were to start creating that kind of content than interrupting the great content that's out there. So that's just one example of how I think that content and advertising are increasingly becoming the same thing.
Yeah, I don't quite understand how the advertising will become content in a program like Vikings.
Because it is the content. So the whole 60 minute, or whatever it ends up being, 53-minute episode is one big, giant 53-minute ad for Visit Denmark, for example. Right? So there's no interruption. It's the content itself is the ad. And the only way you're going to get engagement is if you really create something that's great. And look at all the content that's out there. Everybody's been predicting the death of TV and programming and so on. Absolutely not. It's going the opposite way. I'm so stressed that when I look at my sort of view list and my wish list of series that I want to watch, it's not going anywhere.
So it's almost like a sponsorship where the brand becomes, the show becomes a platform for the brand because the brand paying for it.
Yeah. But it's more than a sponsorship, so you can, and that again, I think that really speaks to understanding what are the brand pillars, what are the things that make Denmark special and unique, and you weave those into the content itself, so that people are like, oh yeah, that's fantastic. I didn't know that about Denmark, huh? And the whole thing about Viking history and all of that. There's the really rich layers that you could explore that are either educational or entertaining, that really speak to the unique properties of the brand without saying, hey, Visit Denmark, or sponsored by, brought to you by blah blah blah. It's more subtle, but it's way more powerful.
What do you think for the panel at large, or anything from the audience? We've seen people try to create episodic advertising, marketing, communicating, messaging, whatever the right word is, content. what is working now? I mean, I look at Reader's Digest, and I'm not a Reader's Digest reader, but I think of them, and I think, didn't they used to have serials where you start to read, and then you get the next, the next version, and it would continue on, Charles Dickens style or whatever. I mean, is there a sense that outside of long-form Vikings, Volvo commercials, let's say, is there a sense right now that people should be creating that story that goes the distance, that goes the whole season, whatever that means? Or is it still, try it, if it works, create variations, max your social media or media, and then go? Is there a sense of really storytelling longer form within the sort of bite-sized advertisements we're seeing? Or is that just too difficult, too much risk, too much client attention?
I think you're seeing it because you have the second screen experience. I'm not talking about syncing. I'm talking about, was it 85 to 87% of people who are watching TV are on another device. And a lot of times what you're doing is if you're watching Vikings, big fan by the way, you're Googling about them and about the show and diving in deeper. You're on the history, channel app, things like that, or website. So you're seeing brands doing complementary programming, knowing that you're watching the show and looking at their app. And that way, it's a great way, because also advertising, usually more of like a banner kind of advertising is popping in. So your mind's not thinking, oh, I just saw Volvo ad right there. I'm diving deeper into the engagement of the show. So I can't necessarily speak to a serialization of it, but there is a way to grab your audience and give them advertising so that you can, pay for the show without disrupting, the television screen. And second screen advertising and second screen experiences have been incredibly successful for, say, the Ellen DeGeneres show, for, scripted programming. There's been many, many, many use cases for movies even. There actually was a use case in the Netherlands a few years ago where the movie was actually built with an app, and the audience was to be on the app while watching, and it was an engaging experience. Now, obviously, you don't want that in a normal, movie experience, but there are ways that you can take your brand, take your messaging, and be really creative with it that your audience could get really excited about and actually expand to a new audience.
Okay. So you mentioned in the audience, the show as a platform or OTT or sort of over the air as a platform. There are new platforms probably every quarter or every year out there. How does a brand sort of find attachment with a new platform before it becomes mass appeal? Is there any metric? Is there a team out there, the innovations team? Is there someone trying to say, hey, I'm watching these platforms and this is an up-and-comer? And then how, if that's interesting, do they attach and work with them typically?
I'd say have a good agency.
I didn't want to say it, but yeah.
I think what we found is you hear about all these new platforms, and it's always, well, how do we get on Snapchat, and how do we do Facebook Live, and we've had a great digital agency who can sit back and say, you know what, like, it might sound really exciting to do this thing that you think you should do, but really you should go a different direction. And so I think it's really important for brands to have the right resources that are focused on this every single day, because it's really easy to jump on what's new and just think that you have to be doing that when it's not necessarily the right move for your particular brand or content.
Totally
That's your
agree.
plug.
I know. Go agency. No, I completely agree. I mean, not every new technology, VR, gamification, tactics, things like that actually makes sense. So having a partner that can, in an agency, whoever they may be, whatever their expertise may be, to be able to actually say no to you and you listen. But to know me is to know that I hate someone saying no to me and then not offering a solution after that. So that might not be the right path with all these new technologies. However, offering you, what about this idea, and brainstorming that out. Because it really all comes down to what's your goal at the end. I mean, in Hyphen we talk about our North Star. What's our North Star? We always have the same North Star. And we might get there in different ways based on the technology out there and the resources we have, but that's what you always have to hold true with your brand. What is your end goal in all of this? Because how you get there might change, because quite frankly, Facebook throws things at us every 5 minutes, and they're our biggest partner, and we love them. But you know what? Sometimes they're like, yeah, we're just deprecating this whole thing. Good luck with that. We'll give you 2 weeks. I'm like, oh God. But you make it work, because they also help us and guide us to this other place. So just, again, knowing your goals, knowing how to get there, and knowing that you have really smart partners that you have confidence in to not lead you astray and who will walk down the path with you is really important.
And what is critical mass? I mean, again, let's say an agency refers you to a platform and says, we got a really big deal. It's all pro bono. It's all going to be free. They're just trying to build. They want volume. They want your brand because it's a sexy brand. They want to attach a big brand to their investor deck, let's say. And you are looking at it saying, what is my resource cost, opportunity cost, agency, cost or fee? What's the number? I mean, assume it's the most immersive, crazy, cool thing. AI meets VR meets whatever. What is the minimum or the critical mass of scale of users, let's say, that gets you interested? Whether it be just for testing, focus testing, anything like that. Is there any set number? I know it all depends on the platform or device, but is there any minimal number? Is it 1,000, 10,000, 50, 100? What is that number and why?
For us, it's dependent on the brand. So when a brand comes to us and says they want to work with us, the first thing we do is we audit their accounts to see what their reach is, what their engagements are, because they will usually tell us this is our goal, and then we audit and say, you're never going to reach that goal. That's unrealistic. Or we say absolutely, because they're coming to us to say we're doing well or we're doing poorly and we want to do great. And that's our job, is to make it great. So it really depends on what they've been doing and the brand and the reach.
So you're measuring both sides, both
So
the
we're
brand
measuring all
and
sides.
the platform.
Absolutely.
Trying to marry it.
Yeah, we have to. We are any agency who's worth their muster, and I think most are like this, are looking at all of your metrics. It is a data game. We are trying to understand what you're doing, how you're doing it. And again, back to that goal thought. But when we do we'll call it pro bono work, absolutely, for clients. The things that we measure is it sexy? Is there opportunity here to really grow this business? Because even though we're doing it for free for them, they're still spending money on advertising. We're just not taking a fee. So we're not taking that fee because we see a benefit to not taking a fee, as in growth in business. We have minimum spends accounts or amounts in our company. Most do. So if you are spending less than that, then it's probably not going to be. But if there's growth there, there are a lot of factors that we take in. But in terms of, it could be a company that wants to reach 1 million people and has only reached 100,000. Those are the kinds of things that we take into account. But there's not one glowing number. It's way too nebulous right now. And social media advertising is way too nebulous right now. So.
Question for you though. So I work at a marketing agency as well. But one thing I did find is that our brands, big soap brands, whatever, they think they know their story. And what brand doesn't think they know their story?
Right.
So
The smart brands.
my biggest fight had always been, and will continue, as a consultant, I don't think you really do know your story completely. We need to fix it. And yet we have 6 other agencies doing their own. We in charge of the digital, and they have another agency in charge of their global sort of branding. I mean, it can go on and on and on. Another vertical would be TV, advertising. But it really is just one. It needs to be all honed down to one thing. And the brand itself may not get that. Or they do get that. They may be telling other, agencies different stories. I don't think so. But it just always seems very cluttered. The space is always very cluttered. And someone in charge of doing digital marketing and social media for a brand like that, it gets very convoluted, and then it's all of a sudden like, okay, I have this really great idea for this augmented reality for, some sort of, click to purchase reality, whatever, positioning. Oh, no, that's for really helpful.
I think that's a really a very common and familiar problem for brands and agencies, and it's because it's primarily because of the way that brands are structured, right? So they have, budgets are allocated by channel and by type of experience, right? Right, so it's like, you need that comes out of the social media budget, and that comes out of the virtual innovation budget. This comes out of our traditional TV and print budget. This comes out of PR. This comes out of, it's bullshit. It's all bullshit. It's rubbish, and no wonder brands are ending up with completely disintegrated stories and inconsistent narratives. A, because they don't have a narrative that means shit, and B, they're not thinking about how can they tell that story authentically and consistently across all of the channels, even if you do have 5 agencies, but it's, I think brands have to really think about, to your point, understanding their story, because most brands really don't. They think they do, and it's rubbish. We had an example with Green Giant, where they were one of our clients. They brought us in to help them get the Green Giant to be relevant in the 21st century, right? Everybody goes, oh, ho, ho, ho. They were they used to be, Green Giant used to be owned by General Mills. It's now a smaller CPG company. But they were thinking of killing the Green Giant. I mean, I know, shock, horror, right? How could you kill one of America's icons? And so they wanted help with it, and so we came in and we said, we went into the whole mythology of giants, and one of the exercises that we do is using archetypes. Like a lot of branding agencies will have like an archetype exercise. And there's a great book called The Hero and the Outlaw. If any of you haven't read that, it's a really superb. I'm getting a thumbs up over there. And there are 12 brand archetypes, typically the 12 archetypes that brands can usually fit in. And so we did this exercise with the client, but we'd done the exercise with their consumers first. And when we did it with the client, they were like, oh yeah, he's kind of, the Green Giant is like the innocent. He's, kind of harmless, anodyne, does good, but he's harmless, not very powerful. When we did the exercise with the consumers, he's the hero, he's Russell Crowe in The Gladiator. He's going to cut your head off if you so much as look at him in the wrong way. And they couldn't believe it. They really thought that they knew their story. And we said, no wonder you were thinking of killing the brand if this is what you thought of the Green Giant. He's so much more powerful. And they wouldn't go to the hero, but we ended up with creating a 13th archetype, which we called the Protector. Which is Obi-Wan Kenobi, if you want to think of an archetype. He's sort of seemingly harmless, but very powerful. The force is great within him. And if you look at the work today for the Green Giant ads, and this work, we did this 6 years ago, another agency is doing the work, you'll see that. You'll see that archetype is still in the essence of the brand promise.
I mean, we do the same thing. We do personas. We call them instead of archetypes.
Right.
And when we go into a brand, we just did this, a very, very large sportswear brand, I'll say. I can't say who they are. And same thing, very fractured, lots of budgets, and you have to get a champion who will bring them to the table. Multiple meetings, lots of travel, putting together a sound strategy that proves to each group why, so your local, your national, et cetera, and why the personas work, and it's all based on data. It's based on experience. It's based on understanding. It's not easy. I'm not going to pretend that it is. Not every brand's going to jump on and say so, but large national groups, we've had success, but it is a long haul, and it is showing the personas and showing the strategy and showing why. It's always the why. That's what we're always trying to prove, why you're doing it.
What is and I'll let you jump in too, Jamie, but what is everyone, or mostly Marcy, has said data is the ammunition, it's the gunpowder. I'm wondering, and I'll let you speak first because you were going to, but I wonder if we can share with the audience specifically what data do most brands want to prove the point? Because I think it's always this dashboard, and it's going to be CPEs and CPMs and CP whatevers, but I really want to nail down what that is that's current right now that people are saying, that's what I want. I don't want the millions of impressions because that's just BS, just trying to fill the water tank or whatever. I need the actual real metrics that are going to prove to my bosses, my superiors, my owners that this is a real win for us and this agency is best in class. But I want to let Jamie finish her last response and maybe jump into this one.
Sure. I was just going to say consistency was the key word that I heard you say in the last question of what's important for the brands, and when they do have multiple agencies, being consistent across the board with that message that they're putting out there, regardless if it's internal or external, I think is the key. And then you can have multiple agencies and multiple partners, but at least everybody's sort of marching to the beat of the same drum. I think you have a challenge when you have a brand that's willing to be splintered depending on which way an agency starts to guide them. So that, I heard you say consistency, and that stuck out for me. For us, in terms of metrics, I mean, ours is relatively easy. It's ticket sales. If we sell a lot of tickets for an event very quickly, we know our marketing's working and the message is out there. If we don't, that's when we start to really dig deeper into a lot of the underlying metrics to see, for us, more than impressions these days, it's definitely engagement. When we're putting content out about a particular event or even branded content, just specifically pushing our brand, if we're not seeing engagements, that's where that's what we look to measure, and growth in our overall fans and following and loyalty. That's if we're growing that on a consistent basis, we feel like we're doing a really good job. When we're not, that's when we sort of raise the red flag and try and understand what's going on and why consumers are not, or why our content's not resonating with consumers.
Can I ask kind of a attached question?
Sure.
Were you asking really, or I guess I'm interested in understanding what kind of data actually informs your brand development on a more conceptual level? So when you're thinking about the persona or the archetype, is there data that you look at, historic data that from which you engineer or ideate from to develop the more conceptual aspects of the brand?
So for us, we do. We have an entire analytics team. So each campaign's different. The objective is different, so the metrics you're going to get, the channels are different. So Snapchat, for example, is very limited. You get swipes, basically, which is, instead of a click, it's a swipe. But it really...
But what I mean is there an example of a brand or a direction that you're taking the brand? This is the story. This is the character driving this idea. Is there an example of that you can point to? In this case, for example, this was the kind of data that had us take the giant in the direction of being this type of character versus another.
It's really subjective, again. We take, because we have the benefit of a creative side and an executional side, we really work with our creative teams to understand creative, so back to that content is king, understanding how that made from other clients that we've worked with in like areas. So even if a client says, my goal is app installs, I want people to download my app. We take past clients who've done that and the successes that they've had, and we also look at the creative and what that's done and how that's really, how that message has really amplified what's going on with the client. So it's really subjective in terms of the data, because all the data can be different. So it depends on the objective and the objective that you're trying to get to the client to, because you have the reach and frequency clients who are like, well, I just want awareness. And you're like, no, you don't. You think you do, but you don't. So to your point of awareness versus engagement. So the story that how we get to personas is based on the creative audits that we do of the client that is trying to work, that we want to work with, and clients who are in a similar space. So if it's QSR, CPG, what have you, putting together that picture and those personas and matching that with actual metrics from CPI, CPM, OCPE, whatever it is, that we think will tell the best story. So we have the benefit in my particular agency, and I know we're not unique in this, necessarily there are other agencies not as well of, of course. But
I'd probably disagree with that, but
I know.
we can talk about that.
And as you should. but we are giving them an entire strategy based on the executional understandings that we have, the metrics that we have, and the machine learning that we have. So I can't point you to exact metrics because it depends on your brand. Are you pizza? Are you selling tacos? Are you selling chicken? What is it that you're selling? And then we can point you into the right direction, because some, it's just, I want more people. We literally have pizza brands, one that just wants everyone to know that they exist, even though they're a national brand, and one who wants you to buy their pizza. You'd think it'd be the buy, but it's not. Both are doing phenomenally well.
But it really goes back to really understanding your audience. And again, most brands think that they understand the audience, and again, like I said right up front, you've got to go beyond the data. The data is a really good starting point, but you've got to unpack that. And so data is really, it's just a collection of narratives that come together to form a particular data point. And so, you just keep, you've got to be like an investigative journalist when you're really trying to understand the audience. Well, that's interesting that this data point exists. Let's now interview the audience. Let's find out. Let's find out why this data point exists. Let's ask why. Well, why do you say that? And why do you say that? And let's interview the brand. And they say this, blah, blah, blah. Well, we are natural and fresh. Bullshit. Most brands that claim they're natural and fresh are neither of those. They're far from it. So, and you can't claim that anymore. You can't hide. You will be found out. The reaction, the adverse PR reaction will be momentous, as we've seen recently with Pepsi and others. And so find out what those individual stories are. And we worked with Klondike, and they said we want to reach mums. We think that mums, and they gave us a whole bunch of data to support that we're going to reach mums. This is our audience, and we sort of kind of pulled it apart and said, actually, you need to reach 18 to 25-year-old boys, and here's why: because we've interviewed them and we've done our research, and we think this is a much bigger market for you. And they went with it. The most successful digital campaign ever produced for Unilever in that year, this was about 4 or 5 years ago. 13% lift in sales. They ran out of wrappers for the Klondike bars. And this was the whole Adam Carolla, what would you do for a Klondike bar series. That we had to come up with, they had to manufacture these boxes to house the bars because they'd run out of wrappers, and we had to come up with a story for why what's up with the box and all of that. But had we taken their data and not asked why, and quizzed it and prodded it and unpacked it and kicked it around, we would have probably had a successful campaign, but nowhere near as successful as 13% lift in the CPG space is unheard of.
That's great. I'm going to kind of combine questions. We have 15 minutes, so I'm trying to involve the audience as much as possible. So this is open to the panel and to anyone else. Out there's a lot of original programming. I think Netflix kind of kicked the tires first, and everybody else is now following. And you got some wins, you've got some maybes, you got Apple in the background with a little bit of cash to spend on this stuff if they so choose to bring back the experience to the Apple innovation team, let's call it. But I wonder, what is the content, and it could be original programming too, that is creating the most brand lust? And I feel free to shout it out if you either have that brand in your arsenal or you just are so addicted to their content around their branding. And I want to, of course, open it to these domain experts as well. What's the brand lust right now? What's the big one that you guys go, I want to follow that, or I want to do something like that? Do you guys have any? Maybe it's your own, but maybe it's someone. I love the Big Green Giant because I haven't thought of that for a decade, I guarantee it. But I wonder, is there anything else that is floating boats right now where people say, that's what we got to do? We need that energy. Someone's walking into your creative brain think and saying, look what they did over there, we need to do that. And if it has original programming, I'm even more interested, because I think longer form, more sort of retention around the content is very key. But any thoughts for the panel? Or again, shout it out if you guys have a favorite brand outside of maybe Apple a couple years ago.
I think there's a lot of outdoor brands that are doing great content right now, like the Patagonias and the REIs of the world, because they're really connecting with their consumers by developing this content that's about either doing good for the environment, or whether it's just some type of high intensity workout that somebody's doing that everybody can aspire to. So I think that there's a lot of outdoor brands that are doing a great job with the content they're developing.
I think GoPro does a good job. GoPro does a great job with that, and I also think Nike does a really great job, especially on their women's campaigns.
So a lot of lifestyle, a lot of
Yep.
sort of energy,
Yep.
Red Bull type stuff. Okay.
I think some of the media channels too. So Nat Geo, I think it does a really good job. They've, arming people with 360 cameras and sending them off into the wild, and to come back with stories is great. And again, they're thinking about the audience. They're collaborating with the audience in creating these fantastic shareable stories. We haven't mentioned Vice magazine. I think Vice, all of their channels are doing some really interesting stuff, and whether you're on the agency side or as a media channel, they're competing with agencies, they're competing with other media channels, and giving everybody a run for the money and doing some really cool stuff. I think we as agencies would argue that they have a community and they have an audience. They don't have the branding expertise, so when they're putting your brand in front of their audience, be careful about whose brand it is that they're selling. Is it Vice's brand or is it yours? And I say that just because they piss me off sometimes.
Vice versus virtue. One example I have, I was on a plane coming back from CES, and we were delayed, and somebody had on a really cool hoodie. It was like a disco ball. I just thought it was interesting, so I said, "Where did you get that?" And the guy said, "Oh, I got that at Beta Brand." I'd never heard of it. And it's up in San Francisco somewhere. And so I searched in Google on my phone real fast, and I caught a video, and it was a very low rent video, very authentic. It was, the title was Martian Parkour, which sounded interesting. I don't do parkour. I watch a Mars movie every once in a while, but that's about it. And it was just fit people, obviously, attractive people, jumping around rocks in Utah, wearing these new Timberland / whatever type of Kickstarter shoe brand it was. I ordered it immediately at full price and returned it when it came because it didn't fit very well. But the story, though, is that video, that sort of spurt of creativity, which I had not seen, and again, you mentioned Nike and Patagonia and stuff like that, really drew me in. It was not only the video side of it, but it also was just the creativity that just kind of taught me. It wasn't social media, it was all word of mouth, which is rare these days on some level. But it just sort of caught me and was so uniquely different that I jumped into it. And I think we see that again with Starbucks. I never had one, but the unicorn frappuccino or whatever they did, the Taco Bell UFC, or KFC, sorry, it should be UFC, KFC, a taco made out of chicken wings or something crazy like that, or Dorito bars. So I think we're seeing more and more people trying to break or hack the product a little bit.
But they're kind of also, it's really interesting because I think everybody, the more successful brands are really drawing, again, stop me if I'm boring you, audiences into the experiences.
Right.
But also, really not just digital experiences, but bricks and mortar. So you mentioned Starbucks.
Right.
They have the Roastery, which, I live in Seattle and I'm a proud Starbucks supporter, even though the coffee is kind of average. They have the Roastery. They're launching it in 100 different cities around the world. They're just building, and they're not alone. So this is a sort of a really an amazing experience. If you go into a Starbucks Roastery, who would think that Starbucks could be selling $12 cups of coffee and it's really, really good. And so it's really helping to elevate the brand. I think they could go a step further and start using technology and bring that physical experience to life using technology, connecting with maybe the farmers, connecting with the roasters themselves, connecting, and starting to create your own stories. Lexus is the car company is setting up their own display space in the meatpacking district in New York. Which is going to have top chefs from all around the world. And again, I'm thinking about how do we reflect the passion for perfection that Lexus has, and bring chefs into that to tell our story in a completely surprising way. Again, I think the opportunity there to connect that physical experience, that really sensory experience, with something digital is kind of the next step. So I think those are really interesting brands to watch. Samsung as well doing the same.
What about taking a giant leap and falling flat on your face? Jenner and Pepsi. I hope they know Pepsi.
Kendall's back there.
But would the four of you have looked at the rough cut of that commercial and said, don't go there?
Yes.
It's so easy to be wise after the event.
Also, yeah, but there's a huge effort to cut through the flooding. Wouldn't you say that they were aiming for? Is it like killing?
Well, they managed to do
Is it like
that.
killing the green
They really managed to do that spectacularly. I think it's just taking sort of real issues that are in the zeitgeist right now and trying to sort of get some brand halo effect out of it is really dangerous territory. I wouldn't go there. You know, there's a, you know, I'm not going to mention it, but you know, I think that, yeah, it's just dangerous territory.
I think Stephen Colbert and, you know, who's it, John Oliver, those guys have leveraged and timed well the market. I think for a big, you know, CPG like Pepsi to try to cross that divide is extremely risky. But the same thing can be said, we talked about Starbucks and its unicorn drink that was limited. You know, who out there was saying, that's a great idea, I'm sure that's going to win new customers, or at least get the millennials or Gen Z to come in and take a picture or something. So I actually, to looking back in hindsight, of course, everybody would say, well, wait a second, don't do this. You've already spent $1 million or $2 million. There's a cost factor. But I think there's a level too when you have those, and I'm not saying that was a great commercial. I like the Saturday Night Live version better, but I think that there is a need to have those sort of out there thinkers in the room that will use some of the data. That is the first step perhaps, but I think you still need those people who are trying to create a wow, trying to shatter something. Because if it's just follow what works for the bigger player in your vertical, then why do it, in my opinion? So I think there's some push there.
Is there any, so my name's Nate, I own a brand, it's a men's focused grooming brand, obviously beards are a big context of that. Curious, are there other brands that look across like the table at other brands that have a similar like demographic, so in this case, a male demographic, and seek to partner with those other brands, having a common demographic by which they're both interested in, and then looking at the deeper substance of creating experience, creating content, etc., and deferring, maybe some of the cost associated with maybe more extravagant experience. Have you guys ever seen any kind of brand collaboration for marketing campaigns like that in this day and age, and with using digital and experience and that type of stuff, or any interest whatsoever?
So you see a lot of brands and properties, sort of leverage. I think that's huge right now, brands and getting associated with properties. Brands and brands. I'm trying to think of a good example.
For instance, so Fathom, right? So Christian has several movie theaters in LA. I have a male brand company. So if they're like in effect a collaboration in that instance where maybe, revisioning of Rambo or Rango, you put that back in the theaters, which Fathom's done before, haven't saw it, First Blood is awesome, things like that. So like with my male brand, that's a cult classic movie that I can generate and move my customer base to an event like that, collaborating with his movie theater and your system as well. Like that type of collaboration is kind of what I'm curious about. Like that sort of stuff goes through my head. Like, does anyone else consider that as a viable option or something that's a reasonable approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think speaking from experience at Fathom, we did something exactly like what you're talking about with Groupon last year around our Ferris Bueller screenings, where Groupon was launching their first consumer ad campaign in many years, and they loved the idea of getting behind Ferris Bueller, and we were already bringing it back to theaters and really pushing their message, which is go out and experience life, which is clearly what Ferris Bueller does. So we created a whole integrated campaign around that, where Groupon came in, sponsored the event in theaters nationwide, got to have their messaging sort of throughout. They also got to use content. It was a little bit of a licensing play too. So they got to use content from that iconic movie in some of their ad campaigns. It was really a win-win for everybody, but they had to pay to play in that instance.
There's a question in the back there too, far back. Still have it?
Yeah, sorry. I was curious whether or not some of these brands are starting to take on sort of the mentality of content providers, whether or not you've seen that in their behavior. For example, I don't know, like I think California raisins are like a product, and then no farmer, for example, attributes their success to that. So I'm just curious whether or not these people start to take on the mentality of content providers rather than selling the product that they were.
I think definitely you see companies doing that. What I see more and more, these big brands turning actually into tech companies. So Walmart actually refers to itself as a tech company now, if you can believe it. So yes, I think you do see big brands saying, I'm successful because I tell stories. And that's how you are successful, by telling stories. That's what advertising is. Successful advertising is telling a great story. So you are seeing that start to happen. But more of what I'm seeing is these big companies, these big brands turning into tech companies. I mean, Domino's has the most successful app, I think, that exists. I mean, and look at their commercials based around the app. I mean, it's so successful.
Look at Red Bull.
Red Bull,
I
yeah.
mean, they are, I think, probably the dominant content brand out there.
And it's
They own those
99% earned media.
Yeah,
They don't
I mean,
even really
talk about
advertise
taking a
anymore.
giant leap of faith. Felix Baumgartner did exactly that now to a Red Bull balloon. You know, and got tens of millions of engagements, and because of it. That's what Red Bull does is create great content, and they own that space, and they've really thought about who are we trying to reach, what are they interested in. Okay, we're going to create those experiences for them that they can share.
Their biggest challenge, you know, during marketing. It's
Right.
difficult to manufacture.
Right.
I think that
Yeah,
Red
exactly.
Bull, Red Bull Studio is obviously huge success. GoPro, some stumbling, let's say, obviously, but they also went after that same, let's build the YouTube for extreme sports.
Casper,
Tesla.
Casper, you know, the betting company, or bed company, Casper. What's that? Yeah, they're all about. They own the conversation around sleep, right? They're a mattress company, you know, a startup, and what a great. So they've thought about, oh, who's the audience? What do we have authority in? It's not, you know, we're not going to be talking about, you know, ISIS or anything else. We're going to be talking about sleep. That's what we do, and they create fantastic content.
Anyone else like brand creating studio content, you know, as opposed to the earned media versus the paid media? Anything else jump at people? I'll get your question in 1 second, but anyone else?
There's a big one called Six Pack Shortcuts on YouTube. They're like the third or fourth largest YouTube channel. They're
Yeah.
direct response marketing guys. They sell, you know, supplements and that sort of stuff, and they are gigantic.
Right.
All original, all their own content. Local guys in Austin, great, smart, young guys, great with data, and yeah, at one point in time they had a larger YouTube channel than Sony.
That's great. Yeah, I think we'll see more of that. I think the studio approach, kind of, you know, with all the consolidation, everything's moving this direction. But I think you get the smarter advertising firms to say, listen, here are the people we need. Let's put them in a room. Let's start to develop out what that is. If it's consistency, authenticity, whatever the sort of call to action is. I love the Lexus perfection. Let's take the chefs, and let's take the models and the artists. I mean, Apple's trying to do that as well. Last question in the back.
Yeah, I'm a tech company in San Francisco. Has any one of the panel, their brand shown a media partnership that has actually moved the needle in the ROI perspective as relates to the direct correlation between that brand and that media partnership as far as sales in a particular channel? So it's correlated, this brand attached to this piece of content, which actually moved revenue.
We have an example with our TCM Classic Movie Series where we do classic movies both with TCM and then outside of TCM. And we have plenty of data that shows that when we're doing the movies in conjunction with Turner Classic Movies, running media, I mean, we have a pretty integrated partnership there that those titles typically perform I mean, 2 to 3 times better than the ones that we don't have them on board for. And again, title specific, but yeah, and that's been a great media partnership for us. And that's a key strategy for us, is to continue to find those partnerships that you can sort of amortize over time for content over and over versus starting from scratch each time.
In a former life, the company, we did a movie release, and the key was tying TV and social advertising. We saw a 40% lift. 40%, because traditionally people go for TV, especially movies and movie premieres, or not movie premieres, movie openings. But they weren't 40% lift in conversion, yeah. And why that was is because when you go after TV or you just go after social, you're only getting part of the audience. The TV, they're complementary. We need to tie them together. So what happened was we said, okay, you got this audience. We know what you got based on Nielsen data. So if we go over here, we're going to retarget and target the areas that you missed, and got a 40% conversion rate off of 2 movies, 2 different use cases. So for me, I would say in TV and finding, again, about knowing your audience and finding your audience and finding who may be your audience, using that data, you can find great opportunities there.
All right, I want to say one last thing for the panel. If you have not worked with or mentioned on this panel so far, I always like to push you out a little bit of your space. Your favorite brand, just 1 word, 2 words, whatever it is. We'll start with Story Worldwide.
Oh, gosh. Toby's Estate.
Which one?
Toby's Estate. They're a coffee brand. Don't tell the Starbucks folks I said that. They're my favorite brand.
You may have to skip me like in a restaurant. I'll come back to me.
For me, it's easy, Tesla. Wish we worked with them. Excuse me, but that's why I love them. They don't need me or anyone else, and everyone knows who they are.
I'd say, gosh, 1, can I go 2? Anthropology, because I think they create a real lifestyle feel around everything they do. And Lululemon, because I think they've just done a really great job as well of integrating what they do in the retail space with what they do online, and really capturing the consumer.
Lee, what comes
Audi, I would say.
Which one?
Audi cars.
Yeah. Great. Well, I want to thank the panel very much for their time. Thank you.